Welcome to another episode of Wild and Exposed podcast. We've got a really full boat tonight. Got Drew Hamilton up in Churchill. Drew, how are you coming off polar bear season?
Doing well, just recouping. Got a couple nights sleep under my belt, so I'm ready to start podcasting again.
Okay, we've been going back and forth a little bit before this podcast started. And Drew's been whining about all the hard work he's done during polar bear season. And I want to clear something up. Aren't the days like 3 hours long?
Yeah, but we're working all 3 of those hours. Like it's just brutal. It's just brutal. No, polar bear season, like you're working, you get up before the sun. So the days where they usually get up at 5:45, and then you go all the way through. You take people out, you take them to dinner and all this stuff, and then I'll be damned if the aurora doesn't come out, and then you're up till 1, and then you got to start it all over again at 5:45, and you just do it every day. And like it's so much fun, but by the time you're done, you're just ready to sleep.
Worn down.
Yep. But the bears are still here. The people are all gone. The bears are still here. This bay hasn't frozen yet. So I'm sure conservation's working overtime trying to keep these bears out of town because they're getting a little anxious. We thought the ice was going to come kind of right around like the 15th, 16th, 17th, right in there, kind of look. And then the wind went back to the south and blew all that ice offshore. So all these bears are still here and nobody to watch them.
Crazy. And Michael Mauro, we just finished up a trip. Mike, why don't you let everybody know a little bit about that?
Oh yeah, we went down to Austin, Texas, and did a little, what do you want to call it, presentation at a camera shop expo. It was a lot of fun. We got to have some fun, talk to a lot of people. We spent all day there, so we got to talk to tons of different people that are just interested in photography, and I think it was a really successful event. Turns out they liked it so much, they have another shop in Houston. So Brandon and I are going to go to Houston. I think it's the first weekend in December and do the same thing down there.
Yeah. So that brings us to Brandon Day, videographer for the Austin trip and the Houston trip.
Hi, Ron. Hi, guys.
They can't see you waving, Brandon. You got to speak.
I figured that out. I was like, we're not in Zoom anymore.
Our guest of honor tonight, Casey Anderson, coming to us from Montana. Welcome, Casey.
Thanks for having me, guys.
So this is a little cross-podcast contamination. Casey is a host of Sidetracked with Casey Anderson, and also has VisionHawk Films. So welcome, Casey. Thanks for giving us a little bit of your time tonight. Look forward to the conversation after looking at your reel and some of the conservation projects that you've got. Looking forward to hearing a little bit about those.
Great. Yeah, I look forward to telling you some stories.
Yeah, first story you can tell us. You've been around quite a bit. So what is your favorite ever outdoor experience?
Whoa.
That's a tough one.
Start out guns a-blazing.
Yeah, we're not going to waste any time.
Yeah, my favorite outdoor experience. I mean, there's so many different levels of that. I think that I'm a father of 3 kids. One's just about to turn 4, my oldest, so young kids. And I'm no spring chicken myself. I'm kind of a grandpa dad. I spent most of my younger years adventuring and being anti-child and anti-overpopulation of the earth, and wasn't going to have any kids and was just going to be a feral human. But as I got older, I wasn't really planning it, but had a kid. And it was the greatest thing that ever happened to me. So, I mean, some of my outdoor experiences recently with my children, particularly my little 4-year-old girl who loves to go out with me, those have high value. I mean, they may be some of my favorite moments of all time. We just climbed up about 11,000 foot peak about a month ago, and it was a slog for anybody, and her will to go up there. But that was a wonderful outdoor moment. But before the kids, and I like to tell the story. This is a recent one, and one I haven't told very much. As a filmmaker, I'm always looking for these unique stories. And as a filmmaker, when you go on location and you get your shot list, and it's usually the same old crap. They want to see mating animals. They want to see animals killing other animals. It's the moms nursing their kittens and cubs or whatever. It's just the shot list is usually the same. I like looking for those things that are a little out there, a little things that people maybe never seen, things that are thought provoking. And the one that happened to me recently, and I would say this is, when people do ask me what's my favorite thing I ever filmed or my favorite experience I had in a while, this is right up there, maybe at the top. I was in Patagonia filming pumas, and we had been following this mother with 2 5-month-old kittens for, gosh, probably about 2 months at that time. And, you get to know these personalities, and the mother she was an assassin. Every time she wanted to go kill something, she just did that. She would go kill something. It was like, she was so good at it. So we were watching them sleep all day like cats do. And we knew she was going to get up and go kill something. And then her 2 kittens are, both very individual personalities. One was a mama's boy, and the other was the little girl was kind of an independent soul. So as mom got up to hunt, mama's boy was always wondering where she was going to go. And so he kind of would follow, and the little independent girl was just sitting there and not following and just doing this really strange behavior. She was just staring like almost catatonic at the sky. And at this point, I'm sitting in a camera truck, right? And I'm operating a shot over system. So I'm like, basically using remote control, looking at a monitor in front of me, and the camera's on top of the truck. And I'm just focusing on her and watching her. And I'm talking to the guy driving, and I'm just going, what's going on with her? She's just strange. She's just sitting there staring, like not looking. So I'm like kind of leaning and looking. Is she looking at birds or something? Like often they'll cue into the condors that are circling something. But I look out kind of like this, and I don't see anything. And I just think this is really strange. So I just started recording it. And this goes on for 5 minutes as mom and the other male walk off. And she has not moved at all. And I'm just perplexed. I'm like, something's wrong with her. I don't know what's going on. So I end up opening the door and getting out of the truck. And I just to look around a little bit more. And as I look around, all of a sudden I like, bam, right here where she's looking, where I couldn't see because of the roof of the truck, is the full moon. And it just struck me so deeply. Here's another child of the earth seeing this full moon, probably maybe for the first time, and she just is in awe with it. She's just loving it, just like I did when I was a little kid and saw it for the first time. Just like my little girls downstairs, if the moon comes up, they get excited. It's the moon, it's the moon. And here's this puma, these bloodthirsty killing machines. That's all they don't feel anything. They don't think the moon's cool. Look, obviously thinking the moon is the dang coolest thing she's ever seen, and just looking at it. And those are the moments, man. Those are the cool moments that if you spend a lot of time out in the wild, you get the chance to see. And those hit me, man. That hit me hard. And it's still to this day one of the coolest things I've ever seen. I mean, I've seen the craziest kills and the rarest animals, and I've seen all this stuff, but it's stuff like that make the big impacts. I
always say that I do this to see the things that happen when we're not there. And if you spend enough time out there, they just kind of accept your presence and just start to act naturally. And you can tell when that switch is flipped, because they go from looking at you, even taking glances and going back to feeding and take another glance, to just totally ignoring your presence. And then when you see the kind of behaviors that you just described that you'd never would expect, it never ceases to take me by surprise and just make me understand exactly how little we know.
That's right. No, I think there's so many complexities and intricacies and nuances. And we all know, we've spent the time, we've watched the animals, they've surprised us over and over. We see their personalities, for a lack of a better term. We see their individualisms. And it's complex out there. And it's hard to tell those stories. It's hard to, even if you see them, it's hard to tell them and share them. But I think that's the thing that keeps me going out there, is like, you got to keep trying, because I think when people see things like that, they'll look at a puma differently, and they just open up their mind. And I think that if a puma can look at the full moon, why not a polar bear, right? Why not a moose? They all are, man. They all are. That's the bottom line.
You know what I think about all the time? And Drew, I know you're going to ask a question, but this just popped into my head. Think about all those moose that get to see Aurora. It's got to be, I don't know. Do you know caribou, moose, wolves, all of them? They all got to see aurora quite often, right? So you got to wonder if they just sit there and look at it and say, who knows what they say, but they got to think about it.
They're probably cursing their dichromatic vision. Yeah, I've always wondered what it looks like to polar bears. They're missing, not quite seeing the greens the way we are, but it's got to be something. Like, they've got the best seat in the house. And Casey, that reminded me of just some special moments of like watching bears watch sunsets, and just it's moments like that give you unique insights and really chip away the facade that's been thrown up, and especially with predators and things like that, really chip away at that facade that's been thrown at you for so long. And so suddenly they become their own individuals and creatures right before your eyes. So yeah, those moments.
Well, I shared a moment with you, Drew, and McNeil,
when we watched the sunset together.
Let's get this out in the open. Whatever it is, let's get it out in the open.
But Casey, you really dropped the ball on the best wildlife moment, since we have camped together. Like, you really just, your puma story is probably a close second, and I understand that, but we did have some good times out at McNeil together.
They're good. No, but the one that really struck me there, man, that I actually recently kind of reached out to because I wanted to get the details, but it was that Braveheart story. This same thing, this bear there in McNeil, and obviously Drew knows this story better than I do, and he can fill in here, but you watch these bears, and bear, you've seen it all. If you've seen it, fishing for salmon, you got the big bear gets the best fishing hole, and you got the bear that snorkels, and you got the bear that catches it, and it's all the stuff you see at Brooks, right? All the stuff you see at Brooks. But then, you sit there, and I think one point we had 43 bears at McNeil that day, and you see all the individuals, and they're doing a lot of the same stuff. But this Braveheart bear, that's what you called it, he had this tactic, I just loved it, where there's these certain boulders that are really great fishing, and then the eddies, and that's where the big bears go to sit. And you got to be a pretty tough dude to be sitting at those perfect fishing holes. Well, he realized that he could be a boulder. So he'd just go put his butt anywhere in the river he wanted to and just sit there, and that eddy would create in front of him. The fish would start stacking up, and all he had to do was just leap forward. And he was catching more fish than anybody. And that's something that, I highly doubt he learned from his mom, but he was opportunistic, and the dots connected, and he realized he could do that. And it was really effective. And I just thought it was so funny just to watch him do it over and over again. And again, just these little quirky intricacies, individual personalities, and was working. And that was a really obvious one. Think of all the things that we don't even notice, right? That all these individuals have. Yeah. That was a cool story. I tell that story all the time.
And I do have to give you big kudos, Casey, because while you're at McNeil, there was a fun game that we used to play that would entertain the staff, and it was called Where's Braveheart? And so Braveheart at the time was pretty. He's huge now. He's one of the bigger bears there now. But at the time, he was just kind of a middle-sized male bear, kind of nondescript if you didn't have an eye for it. And so I'd always point him out. Like, he was the first bear I'd point out. And then about 2 hours later, not when he was doing his unique fishing style, but when he was somewhere doing other bear stuff, I'd just be like, hey, okay, where's Braveheart? And I don't remember if you were the first or the only person who was ever able to be like, oh no, he's right there. Like, you nailed
a lot of bears. That's the one thing. Probably, a lot of your guests and people that go there, they probably look at bears a lot, but I stare at, think about it. There's for about 20 years there, I'd go out and film bears all day long, and then I'd come home to one. So I'm like, I stare at bears a lot. So I can, the little tiniest little things details I usually can see. So I would be proud to be the only one.
It was not many. It's an exclusive club that we're able to identify him through space and time like that. So, how long ago was that? What year was that?
2014.
2014. Okay. Yeah. You were working on a film project. I remember you and John Shire, we weighed your packs one day, and one was like 118 pounds and one was, I didn't offer to carry anything, but I marveled at the fact that One pack was 118 and the other was like 112 pounds or something like that.
Yeah, and John and I at the time, John's still a great friend of mine, and it was funny because prior to that we had been to Brooks and we'd been spent almost a month, actually a month in Hallow Bay prior to that, and carrying that same stuff. So we had whipped into quick shape, but we were competitive. We'd wake up in the morning in the tent and we'd pack our packs, and we did, if there was an extra battery, we wanted it in our pack. We did not want to be the guy carrying the lighter pack. And it got ridiculous, because those were ridiculous packs. Like I said, over 110 pounds, each of them. And we were carrying those every day for 2 months.
And you had a producer with a broken foot.
We had to carry her once too. She broke her foot in Brooks, and we had to carry her ass 3 miles back to the camp.
Casey, let's take a step even further back from 2014. How did you get your start in the industry, or with videography in particular?
Yeah, it was a funny. I mean, growing up in Montana, I was just always interested in wildlife. I used to work at a wildlife rehab place in high school, and then I went to college to study wildlife biology. But in the summer months, I would go to Yellowstone because I was going to school at MSU, and run around down in Yellowstone. And I met a producer from LA when I was 18 down there. And, he was making this show called Safari at the time, and he was a producer from LA. He didn't know the difference between a black bear and a grizzly bear, let alone could find one. And I kind of offered my services. I was a kid that grew up in Montana. I could carry his backpack and I could go find stuff for him. And he, for $50 a day was a good deal for him. And so that's how I got going. At first I was just a Sherpa, a tracker. I grew up tracking with my dad, and that's all I'm good at, really. And I could take, if I could make $50 a day and go do what I was like spending $50 in gas to go do every day, it was awesome. And so it turned, that was the beginning. It was just, I would take stuff out there, and then, I'd be in the field with him, and, he'd be like, yeah, I'm going to go over here and do something. Why don't you I'll show you how to use the camera, and then, do a little camera work on the side, or he'd go back to LA and leave a camera with me. I started help writing stuff. I was doing trips to Africa and India with him. And then, that's how it got going. And then I just really never looked back. He got a big deal. I was on my junior year of college, or sophomore year of college. And he's like, we want to spend the next year with me traveling the world filming wildlife. And I said, yep. Told my mom and dad I'm done with school. And here I am, 30 years almost. It'll be 30 years next year later. And never looked back. I hate telling the kids that story, but it's the way it went. Yeah.
That's a great way to get going. It's kind of similar to what Mike, how Mike got going with it, just guiding initially.
Yeah, I was a fancy truck driver for a wildlife photographer.
Yeah, it's who you know, man, getting your foot in the door, right? And then working your ass off and showing your skills. And and the bottom line, let's be honest, half the resume is in this industry is being a heck of a nice human to be around, right? I think that you're all going to get crammed in a tent together, or going to be in a crappy hotel together somewhere remote, and it's going to be miserable. The last thing you want to do is be in the field with a bunch of jerks, right? So if you're a nice guy and you work your butt off, it's half the battle.
Yeah, and if you're 18 and somebody leaves their toys for you, that doesn't hurt either. You get a chance to get out and get some footage, right?
Yeah.
So where did VisionHawk come from? How long have you been?
Well, it's a good question. We're going to go full circle here. So VisionHawk was born in Hallow Bay in the tent with Sean Shire. We were in there complaining, just like, so that was 2014, right? So we were in the tent complaining about, I think we got a sat phone call because at the time we had a Phantom. We were shooting with a Phantom Flex 4K. That was one of our cameras at the time. And we got a call that they were going to pull the camera out because they didn't have enough time or enough money to keep that camera rented in the field, right? It's a expensive camera. I mean, the thing's probably renting for $1,000 a day or something ridiculous, right? So I get it, right? But so when you're out there trying to tell stories, often it's the budgetary things like that cut your time in the field short, right? And we all know when you're out, we already talked about it, when you spend maximum time in the field, that's when those stories can develop in front of you. And that's when you get the good stuff, right? And so we were complaining. We were like, we were just saying, what would it be if you owned all your gear and you assembled the guys who want to be out there, the passionate guys, what I would call the special forces guys that, they're good. They're going to be able to be tough enough to be out there. Well, let's be honest. We're in this game a little bit because we all love to suffer a little bit too, right? But not everybody does. I mean, I've been in the field with some guys from over across the pond that you get them in a tent and they're looking for their tea maker too. They have them tea every morning and it's not there and they start to fall apart. So so we were talking about, we were just two guys carrying 110-pound packs, right? Full of really cool gear. And we would have stayed 15 years in Alaska if they let us. And, it's like, what's the problem here? The problem is that we couldn't keep the gear out there and we were complaining about it. So I came up with this idea. It's like, I could get an investor. I got some guys who believe in what I'm doing. I said, we could buy some top-notch gear that won't go obsolete for a while. And this is a terrible business idea. I mean, this is the worst business plan you've ever heard in your life. But, it's like we get it in the right hands. We go out there to the Special Forces team. We embed ourselves in these places. We give ourselves time to tell epic stories. The proof will be in the pudding. And while it might be the shittiest business plan you've ever heard, if we can kick ass, we'll prove ourselves and will become sustainable if we're playing the long game, right? And so that's where it came from. So after that trip in Alaska, after I saw Braveheart with Drew, it was the next month I went to a couple friends of mine that have money and believe in me, and I pitched it out there. And next thing you know, I've got a lot of money and I'm buying a $500,000 shot over system. I'm buying the 50 to 1,000 lens. I'm buying their newest red at the time. I'm buying all this stuff and got all this cool gear now. And I live on the edge of Yellowstone. So it's like, let's go put it to use, man. I just, I'm in the field and just go. So I spent the next couple of years doing exactly what that business plan was. And it's seeming where here I am, VisionHawk's still rolling. We're doing more projects. So it panned out. It was a crazy idea. Probably delirious from dehydration in Hallow Bay, but it worked.
You had to be one of the first people out there with a shot over I saw him in Alaska and Denali. I'd see a Cineflex or something like that, but it was so rare. You had to be one of the first ones that had your own and was able to go out and do that. We
were, yeah, for sure. And that was part of the plan. We had to hit it hard. We had to we had to try to get the best of the best gear, right? I think I got that CN20. I think it's number 9 made. Like I got that sucker fast, right? And so now you get that CN20 shot over mounted on a truck system driving through Yellowstone. And yeah, it's just the stuff. You don't even have to be good. My little girl could shoot the shit and it would still look awesome.
Well, I wouldn't go that far, but
but it's and then and it's just after 30 years of being in the industry, you know the people who can shoot the stuff good. The people on the ground that know where all the good stories are. If I'm going to go to Alaska and I'm going to go film something, I call Drew. And I called him last year. He put me in a good spot and I got some badass stuff. And it's yeah. So you have all these relationships and you just put it all comes together, man. And I think that you just got to try hard. We just try hard and you just got to put yourself in the right places with the right people and do it because you love it. Right.
So are you guys producing your own content and then selling it, or are you still like just mostly becoming crew for some of those production companies across the pond, or both?
Both. Yeah, we do both. We've more doing our own stuff now. So we're developing our own story ideas. We're pitching them. That's another thing, I think that's a big part of the business plan that's hard for most people to achieve. But when I hosted a series for years on Nat Geo, And as the host guy, I got to go and hang out with all the executives all the time. And I got to go to these big events where I was, in a room with the, head of Discovery, head of Nat Geo, head of everywhere. Right. So they all became my friends. So that was part of that VisionHawk plan, is that I had a lot of those contacts. I could pick up the phone and call the head of Nat Geo and pitch him an idea. I could call the head of Discovery and pitch him an idea. And that's one of the hardest hurdles to get. So yeah, so I guess to answer your question, we're doing a little bit of both. We're pitching ideas to those people. And then, there's a lot of big projects going on. I think, we've all probably pieces of worked on, and like a lot of what the people are doing over there in Bristol. You got the Plimsolls and the Wild Stars and the Wild Spaces and all the Wilds. And they've been doing these big epic blue chip stuff. And, we've got the gear, we've got the know-how, we've got the reputation. So if they need, mountain lions in the Grand Canyon, they'll call me and say, hey, we can do mountain lions in the Grand Canyon. I'm like, let's do it. Yeah. So I think it's hard to turn those down. They're good money. They're good fun. And they pay the bills when you're, developing stuff and pitching it. Yeah, that's a long answer of that question.
Casey, I think you also have the distinction of being the only guest we've ever had on here who had their own video game.
I did have my own video game, yeah. I know, I forget about that sometimes, and people remind me, and I think that actually is kind of cool.
I played it over at my friend's house with his friend's kids. It was super fun. I think I was catching.
That was a cool thing to develop, because that was the same thing when they came to us and said, hey, we got this Xbox and this new, and it was back in that Kinect days. So they were just starting the Kinect thing, and they wanted to develop a show or a game that, a grandma could go buy her kid that was her grandkid that's 8 years old and not feel bad about it. And if you go and looked at the time, all the Xbox Kinect thing were like, what can you kill? What can you smash? And this one was a cool, innovative way of immersing people where they could become the animal. And yeah, it was a weird process, because I found myself in front of green screens and all the voice. If you play the game, it's hilarious, because like everything is like, good job, you've got 3 points. I sat in a recording booth for 3 days, just like saying like the crazy, all the every expletive you could, not expletive. You know what I'm saying? I probably said a lot of that. I said that too.
Suddenly Graham's got to take that game back.
I said, awesome, cool, way to go, high five, good, yeah, everything, good job. I said every one of you could have imagined, and it was a weird experience, but it actually did really well. There was no part 2, but yeah.
What was it called? What was the name of the game?
It had a really terrible name. Maybe that's why there was part 2. It was like Nat Geo Xbox. It was like just the most generic name. Nat Geo Xbox Connect, maybe, or something like that.
I sucked at it. You didn't have anything good to say to me in there. My friend's kid just destroyed me.
So you didn't get the
Better
awesome
next time.
Yeah. Or you suck. So where do you think the state of the industry is going with this wildlife filmmaking? I've been talking to some friends, and they're like, we feel like, do you watch The Octopus Teacher?
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
Everybody feels like that is it's a more interesting way to tell a story than like these blue chip series where you might get, you're shooting bears and it might be 3 or 4 different bears that make up one storyline. Right. So it's not like
Sure.
I don't know. How do you see it? What type of stuff do you like to shoot, or what kind of stories do you like to tell?
Well, that's this is where I was talking earlier before we started recording this. I'm a bit of, this is an evolutionary thing to me. I'm ever evolving. I'm changing my mind how I feel about it. And now obviously the industry is changing its mind constantly too. Certainly Octopus Teacher had an amazing buzz around it. It got eyes on it, a massive amount of eyes. And I think most importantly, it had what I would call recruited eyes. Most people who tune into all the shows we watch are people like ourselves that already care. And I think that it takes a lot to get those recruited eyes. I'm a bit of a cynic, man, when it comes to what the state of it is. It's like, I often have to sit back and say, why am I doing this? Or why are we doing this? Are we making a difference? And I often find myself saying no. We get a really cool job. It's better than working at Walmart. Pays all right. It's we travel the world. We get to do cool things we want to do. I mean, that's all part of why we do it. We like to suffer. I mean, most of us do. Maybe that's why we really do it. But are we really changing the world? Are we really changing people's minds? Are we saving animals? And sometimes I think, I don't know, really. I mean, maybe we're not. Maybe this is all really a selfish, fun, cool thing we're doing and going out there. And then, then I get an email from somebody that, said, I was a kid. I used to watch your show or play your game. Right. And I went to college and I'm a wildlife biologist. And now I'm doing things to save endangered species. I get that email. Or I'll get a rancher who'll come up to me once in a while here in Montana and say, I watch your show, man. And the way I feel about bears is different now. You've changed my mind. So I get, that's two people, right? And that does make a difference, right? I do feel like that's something. But in the grand scheme of things, I wonder. I was in Bristol once with all the producers, all those people we mentioned before. And someone posed to the room that question, like, how many people in here do you actually think what you're doing is making a difference in conservation in the world? And about 15% of the people raised their hand. So I think if that's the state of the mind of everybody that's in this industry, then we need to think about what we got to break the mold. We got to change things up. If we don't even believe in that what we're doing is doing anything, and that's why we're doing it, then we better start thinking about how we better change it up. So if it takes something like Octopus Teacher, something that I think is relatable for the people who don't care, the people whose minds we need to change, then we got, then maybe that's where we got to go. Start doing more of this, these human hybrid interface with wildlife stories. I don't know. I think we got to keep trying a little bit of everything. I know I'm looking at those stories more and more. I think another thing, and I'm sure you guys have talked about this before, but I'm really trying not to do anymore is crop out the real world. You got this beautiful elk fight happening right over here, but there's a telephone pole right here. You got that choice of that to compose that shot. You're pulling it over and you're pulling the telephone out of it, right? And I mean, there's all kinds of. That's just a simple little example of it. But you know what that does is it just creates this fake kind of Valhalla of wild world. It doesn't really exist anywhere. And I think there's an aspect of when when someone sees that elk fighting and they go by the telephone pole and they have to jump the fence and they cross the road and there's a house in the background. Now this is like those elk become their neighbors, right? It's like it's something that they can like. Oh wait, this is like not out in a place I never can go. This is a place that I could actually go and see. So I think there's a call. I mean, certainly amongst the VisionHawk team, it's like, let's tell stories that people can relate to, and I'm not saying that there's any fault in the planet Earth and America the Beautifuls and all those big things that we all play games and part of. I think there's obviously they get a lot of eyeballs on them, but I also think we got to be careful with what stories we're telling. I know I've sold footage to those places and they take out all that, the fences and the airplanes and the cars driving about in the background, and they'll cut it so it's like in a place that I think for most people that we want to care, it's an unachievable place to them. It's a place that's a dreamland, and it's like, why protect it if it to them it's just like it's another world. But when you reel it in, it's something that's in their backyard or something that they can go see with their kids or their grandkids might be able to go see. Then it becomes something that might be worth protecting. And I think the state of the union amongst filmmakers is that they're all starting to think that we may need to start thinking about things like that. And that's just one example.
Yeah, I think the flip side to that was when I was up shooting with Drew for a BBC thing or a Across the Pond thing. And I was constantly trying to frame out the trash that's on the beaches of Alaska, the buoys, the nets, But it's probably better showing that, because then people realize, hey, maybe we shouldn't be throwing away all this plastic, or maybe we should take a little bit better care of our whatever nets, whatever the
I
situation
totally agree
is.
with that. Yeah, I totally agree with that. It's the real world they live in, man. You know, and it's I mean, you can do it in an innovative way. I mean, there's plenty of times, just take a halibut for example, and then they'll go out there and grab one of those bears, will grab the buoys and play with it for an hour, right? And that's fun to watch, and that'll get people to click on it. Whether it was on YouTube, a bear playing with a buoy, but then there's an important message you can attach to that simultaneously, and that actually will change people's minds and make them behave differently.
So did you have any learning? Because you had Brutus, right? And did you have
Yes.
anything that was similar to the octopus teacher that you learned from Brutus?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, I think just in a big general way, I growing up in Montana, being around grizzly bears a fair amount. Even I had kind of preconceived ideas about bears, and probably was, much more open-minded. But then when I started, I'll give a quick background of that to the people who don't know, who might be listening. Rescuing that bear from an overpopulated wildlife park, and deciding to start a sanctuary when I was 26 years old and raise a grizzly bear simultaneously while I'm trying to pursue my wildlife filmmaking career. Another ridiculous choice that I made in my life, but one I would make. It's just ridiculous. And I look back on it now and it's like, what the hell? But I think it's one of the greatest decisions I ever made, because it translated. It was interesting because I would go and spend time with Brutus and watch him do things, and I think more importantly is the emotional stuff with him. It was the intelligence and the emotional stuff that he would show me constantly, and then it just starts to open up your mind. You're like, you see this reality in this individual, and then I would even go out in the wild and I would see other grizzly bears, and you start to see those little things that you would never see unless you were, spending all the time I was raising him. Yeah, I mean, I talk about one a lot and wrote it in my book. I had this time where he was feeling really terrible, laying on the ground in the sanctuary on the ground. He dug this big hole and he was laying with his leg kicked up, his belly kind of like a fat man in a recliner. And I knew he was feeling bad. And I just went over and started rubbing his belly. And at this point, he was probably a 500-600 pound bear, and he just kind of loved it. And it's like, and kind of just laid back. And then he kind of cupped me with his paw and like pulled me in and was just making eye contact with me. And if you watch bears when they're nursing, often little cubs, they'll be nursing and they're always looking up at mom in her face, looking her in the eyes. And it's a real emotional connection she's making with them, and vice versa. And I would say arguably, especially for large land mammals, that's got to be one of the strongest bonds in the natural world between the mother bear and her cubs. And this is part of that process that creates that bond. And so we had that when I was bottle raising him. I'd hold him and he would nurse and he would look me in the eyes. Well, here I am, fast forward, and he's 500, 600 pounds. And we have this little moment where he's kind of holding me like he would when I was bottle feeding him, and he just started looking at me. And when they're nursing, and you'll see this, and I'm sure Drew's seen it 1,000 times, when they're nursing, they start, they get all the foam around their mouth, and then they actually start getting these little watery eyes. And I used to think the little watery eyes were from them sucking. That's the obvious decision. The obvious reason why they're getting these little watery eyes is because they're sucking and straining, and whatever. That's got to be why. Well, here's Brutus is holding me, and I'm having the same moment with him. He just starts getting these little watery eyes, and I realized that in that moment, and it's happened many times after that he gets little watery eyes. They're not because he's sucking anything, because he wasn't, but he was sharing this highly emotional moment with me, and he's getting tears in his eyes. I mean, and whether I don't know what he's feeling. I mean, never will know. But I know that many times when I had tears in my eyes too, and I know what I was feeling, right? And so who's to say? I mean, I could be, I try not to go out there into crazy land. I feel like I'm a pretty conservative, scientific minded dude. And I have no other explanation. I'm just presenting the facts to you all, and you can draw your own conclusion. So I think then on some level, that was a very octopus teacher way. And he just showed me a depth of an animal that I could have that connection with and allowed to see that depth. And then again, if Brutus can feel that way, then Braveheart can feel that way. And all those other bears that were around it, Braveheart in the river can feel that way. And I think that when you look at a scene like at McNeil and you see 43 bears, you see 43 individual bears that have the potential to be emotional, and you look at it differently.
I just did an interview actually today, and kind of that same question that Mike posed to you was posed to me. And I think the biggest thing is, like you, wildlife biology degree, worked for the Game and Fish Department. The reason I picked up a camera in the first place was to show people, everything that I was able to see. And then shortly thereafter, it started to be these behaviors like you're talking about that nobody ever takes the time to see, because in Wyoming, as in Montana, you've got people that are in the woods all the time, but typically they're after one thing, then they're out, and they don't take the time to observe. It's just go and you're gone. And it's just one time of the year. So when you have the opportunity to observe these animals, I think I don't know, I almost think it's requisite. We're obligated to share those things. And I think, in film, especially you guys that have spent a lot more time in film, you and Mike, and Doug that we had on a couple weeks ago, you guys share those stories in a different way. And I think that's what drew me to want to work with video a lot more than just stills. You can capture those moments in a still, but you can also capture a moment that looks like that moment and turn it into something, but it might not be exactly the same. But to just be there to observe those things and to be able to share them with people, I think that does change people's minds. And especially when you can see that on video. And I guess that's what I wanted to kind of add to what you had said earlier about, are we making a difference? I think that we are. And I think the biggest issue right now is the disconnect that we have with the natural world. More people have a tighter connection with their cell phone than they do with the air that they breathe, almost, to a degree. And so I think allowing people to reconnect, or providing that connection sometimes, it might be a small thing, but it's something.
I think you're right. I mean, again, I don't want to sound like I'm a cynic in that way. If every one of us here changed the mind of one person, it's worth it. And we know we're doing more than that.
How do we make it 50 minutes into the conversation and just now mentioning that Casey raised a bear?
Well, he mentioned it earlier. For those of us that were listening, he did say,
Sorry,
I would go up and
for a minute.
I would go up and film bears, and then I would come home to one. So you did allude to it, but I'm glad that Brandon asked that and kind of got us back to that point. So
I have a question regarding that. So I've touched a lot of bears, never a live bear. What does a live bear feel like?
That's a good question. Like a live
okay. Thanks for clearing that up for me.
I don't know. I mean, I like a dead bear that moves. It's
like there's got to be an energy to it or something. Like,
oh, there's an energy to it. Yeah, I think that's the one thing about it. Depends on the bear too. I've touched a few live bears now. It's that sounds ridiculous, but I have. We've rescued other bears. I've raised other cubs since then, or help bottle feed them or whatever, get them the next level. But a bear has the ability to tear your freaking head off at any second, right? And there's an element of that when you touch a live bear, particularly a large bear, that that. And the fact that it chooses not to is wonderful. But also, but there's a sense of that power that is always there. And then there's also the fact that is that restraint that doesn't want to. It doesn't want to, right? And I think there's something beautiful about that. I don't know. It's the same thing. Like, I don't know if you guys, I'm not an equestrian type fella. I get bucked off horses more than I'd like to admit. But, I think the same thing. You're putting yourself on top of an animal that can buck you off or take off running, and it's got a mind of its own. But you build a trust. There's a choreograph, kind of a choreographed dance of sorts between energies, right? And I'm sure, Drew, man, when you're guiding, and out, particularly in Alaska, where you are feet away from these animals, you start doing things with your body language that you can't even, you can try to teach your guests, right? But you start doing things you don't even know you're doing, and you start to win, and you don't even know you're winning. But the bear is reading you like a book, right? And I think when you're touching a live bear, the bear's reading you like a book, and how you do it, and how it feels. I think it's a magical, intoxicating thing to be that close to an animal that can kill you, and that decides not to, and it's allowing you to share that space and that air with it in that moment. I think that something about it's really, really amazing. I don't know, and again, I'm not. I think I'm a pretty conservative minded guy. Every time I'm around a bear, even Brutus, I never got complacent around him. Every time I stepped near him, I knew that was always a reality, that something bad could happen. And if something bad did happen, regardless if it was my fault or not, he would pay the price for it. And I think there's a responsibility that I needed to, make sure that keep him safe. Right. And then I always have to ask myself, why am I doing this, man? What's the point? And I think in the evolution of me, Casey Anderson, how I've evolved with that. I mean, I'm probably one of the biggest anti-captive wildlife guys that you've ever met. And it became that way because of the relationship I had with Brutus. Every day I wish and hope that my sanctuary would go extinct. That there's no reason why there's orphan bears running around. There's no reason why there's bears that need to be in captivity. I just assume everything takes care of itself out in the wild. Let nature take its course. I don't know. It's and I'm going on a tangent. Here's a sidetrack, but yeah, it's just it's a funny thing, man. But at the same time, I mean, here's a good question. I want to counter back to Drew here. It's like, I just spent another almost a month in coastal Katmai. As you get there and spend those kind of long days there, we spent 3 weeks in Hollow Bay. You start to, you find yourself getting a little, I hate to use this comparative thing as a whole other can of worms, but you start getting a little Timothy Treadwell. You start pushing the envelope, but you push the envelope because you feel like you can, right? And there's some of those bears there, like I don't know. I don't know what her name. I actually had a conversation with Scott Stone because I want to know what her name is. But she would come out of her way to come over to us, and she wanted to be here with us. She wanted to. I mean, plain and simply. I mean, I know bears' behavior. I've been around them for 30 years, and like I said, I go home to them every night for 20. And there was no doubt that bear wanted to interact. He wanted to be in our presence, and that and if you give me another month there, I'd probably touch that bear. And and probably that's the terrible thing to do. And I won't don't say that don't say that very I don't want to be reckless by saying that, I guess what I'm saying, but I could see where that can be convinced. They could convince you to do that, but out of her will. I mean, maybe when I say I would touch her, she probably would have touched me. And it was just one of those things, like, I don't know. It's just a weird thing. Again, there's a big tangent for you.
You might have not been her first.
No, I have an idea. I mean, yeah, exactly. No, I would say not. And it's one of those things, man. It's just weird. And again, I would say most people shouldn't even ever think about doing something like, or having those encounters. At some level, I mean, they have to be controlled. But guys like Drew and guys like Scott Stone and guys like me that have been in those places for a long time, and you guys have been in that particular place much longer than I have and have much more experience. It is funny how intoxicating, how embedded you start to get with these individuals, particularly. And
but frankly, that's a testament to your field craft, because the whole time you're watching her and you're seeing she wants to come over. She's not. If you were putting something else out there, she wouldn't. You know what I mean? Like it's you were behaving in a
totally.
way that she felt predictable, that she built this trust over a period of time. It's something whether
Yep.
it was, I'm sure it's unconscious on your side at this point. It just kind of, you fall back. It's, once you go out of bear country and then you come back and you just kind of muscle memory kicks in and you just kind of fall back into it. And you start doing those things that you didn't even miss. You didn't realize you weren't doing them when you're, now the problem is when you come out and you start doing it to people, start walking down the street going, hey bear, get out of here, get out of the way, kind of thing. That's the sign you've been out there too long, I think.
That's true. But yeah, they the two worlds don't jive very much, do they?
I'm gonna pose this question because you've kind of brought up a couple times the responsibility that we have as filmmakers and presenters, and you see the recent release of a bison film where they talked about, and you're a Yellowstone guy. They talked about Soda Butte, and it, way in the backcountry of Yellowstone National Park, there's a place called Soda Butte, and they don't tell people that it's 2 feet from the highway, and the cinematographer had to have been resting his camera on a buck rail fence to get the shot that he was getting. None of that. What is your take on, as a cinematographer on, we see these beavers in Grand Teton National Park that they're stuffing cameras down in the den. Now there's, if you go back now, they don't tell you the rest of the story ever, but there's no beavers in that location anymore. They split after they'd been, after that had happened. And, I was on a production where we're encouraged to drill into a den with swift fox. And I said, the swift fox will be gone if we do that. They will go and re-den elsewhere, and we may not see them again. And Mike may take some of this out because it's, industry stuff, and we all want to keep working. But what's your opinion on things like that? I mean, as far as putting the animal first.
Oh man. Okay, are you ready for it? You might want to. I can tell you, the older I get, the more I don't give a shit. So, and by that I mean I don't give a shit who I offend. Animals. I think that if you feel like you're doing something that you shouldn't be doing, if you feel like you're gonna, bump a swift fox out of its den, knock some beavers out of their territory, and you feel like you're doing that, then you are crossing a line and you shouldn't be doing it. And if you can't sense if you're going to do that or not, then you shouldn't be out in the field anyway. There's so many charlatans and posers and shortcut makers in our industry, and this is a competitive industry. Let's not be wrong. We're all on the same page and all trying to do the same thing, but at the same time, we're all fighting at the same. And I'm not going to hesitate to say this. It's competitive, and I want to win. I want to be the guy people call up and want to get the job, and I'm not going to take the shortcuts. And if I'm not going to take the shortcuts, and the shortcut people are going to start, and they're going to get the jobs over me, then I'm going to call their asses out. I'm not afraid to, because what they're doing is wrong. I mean, I've seen Wolverine documentaries recently where I know that Wolverine's been baited. I've heard the stories about it being baited. I know the area it's in. I know that that's what happens there, but they leave that part out. I'm pissed off about it because I know I had a near green line on Wolverine project that got black flagged because they had this amazing footage of this Wolverine. Yeah, I mean, this kind of stuff happens all the time in industry. I think that there's more and more people that are policing it. There's more and more accountability, but in the end, it comes down to the buyers, the networks, the streamers. They don't care. They might care. They just don't want to know how it's made. They don't want to know the secrets of how the sausage is made. And, if you can, what happens in the field stays in the field, and you can get that cool swift fox shot. But you basically have ruined what are they, threatened species or endangered species?
They were threatened. They're protected now. They're not. They're no longer.
Yeah, but now you've bumped them out of their den.
Yeah.
It's and that, and there's some people that argue, say, well, the story that we told by bumping that's the collateral damage. But 3 swift foxes will be saved because of this film, and that one swift fox doesn't matter. It's the net of 2. Well, that's bullshit. Figure out a way to do it without being so abrasive and imposing yourself on them. I think that's, spend the time, take your time, be innovative. There's ways that you can get your shots. And if you can't, then heck, I don't know. I'm more for, telling a story that you can't. I mean, I think that's part of it. That's it's just a super sensitive situation and we can't do it. So we're backing out. I think audiences will appreciate that as much as seeing a shot that's been fabricated. Anyway, there's my rant.
Well, I think there's been a market and a big uptick lately in what I've branded as ego-based conservation. And I don't know, somebody else might have thought of that too. But there's this clip on I don't know, the internet of a guy in some fjord in Greenland paddleboarding after a polar bear. And from somebody who's spent a lot of time with bears, and you're reading that bear's behavior, that bear was not digging it. And well, one, if something goes wrong, I guarantee they had a gun in the boat. Like the bear was going to pay the price. And, this is posted on social media and several of us called him out. And he basically said he was above the law because he's doing conservation. And what he was doing would have been a federal offense in the United States. Like just because you don't have Big Brother looking over your shoulder doesn't mean it's right. And there were well established conservation photographers commenting, saying, "Oh, that's so cool," and I'm like, "No, that is not." And then it perpetuates itself where people see that. I mean, he's tagging Dell, like all the big companies that don't want to see how the sausage is made. But this was like, as a former law enforcement official, my blood was boiling. I was like, let's get this sucker. But no, it's social media. That minute has passed. And so, when we were talking about Octopus Teacher and these human dramas mixed into it, there's definitely a lot of good that can come from that, but there's definitely a line that needs to not be crossed in so many things. And I think there's been a lot of that lately. And so I've been, maybe not on the podcast, but on all my tours, we've been calling it out pretty hard.
I think we got to police ourselves, man. I know it's dangerous because you're worried about the next job and, but I think you got to call it out. I think that, I don't know. I mean, I'm in business long enough. I guess I'm not that worried about it at some level. And I, even as I told the stories I did, I know that I'm probably going to get, if people listen to this podcast, they're going to tell me I might get some hate, "Hey buddy, what are you talking about?" I don't care. Cause it's just, I don't know. It's not right. I mean, again, there's that fine line. I mean, as I've hosted so much stuff, I found you find yourself pushing closer and, again, I want to go back and just say, like when I talk about touching the bear, I mean, I would never do that. As particularly wouldn't do it on camera. And that sounds ridiculous. It sounds bad to say it that way, but it's just like, I have to be very careful about how I present myself because people are going to go try to do that shit at the same time. And you don't want that to happen. And it's hard to give the disclaimer that, I've been doing this X amount, I'm doing this, I've got all these safety things and protocols and a good field craft. That doesn't, people aren't going to listen to that stuff. I mean, and let's be honest, man, I think just going back to your story, I mean, paddleboarding, that's ridiculous in itself. I mean, it's the most inefficient way to move on the water. It doesn't even make sense. Anyway, he's just asking for it.
I think the thing is nowadays is and I've stood by this from the get-go, and anybody that's watched me, and hopefully you guys will agree, you've got to lead by example. When you have these situations in these really popular places, whether it's Denali or Yellowstone or Churchill, while our fieldcraft might be good enough to go out there and do something, anybody that's watching doesn't know that. So they think that they're on par with you. And then if you can do it, I can do it. they don't know that we have 15, 20, 30 years doing this sort of thing. They just think that they can go do it. And so you have to just forego those awesome opportunities at times because you're just going to set the wrong example. And then when you do put it up on social media, think about all those people that have no clue that think that that's a cool thing.
No context.
It's true.
Zero.
No
All
context.
right, we got to get it back.
No,
We got to get it back on a positive note because you got too much.
We got
too
whiny.
much
We
good
got whiny.
stuff to talk about. We did a little bit. We took a trip to the dark side, but we're coming back. Casey, what's the favorite project you've ever worked on?
My favorite project, I really like it.
The dark side's fun.
Really.
That's what makes it so attractive, right? So it's hard to come back.
Yeah. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid of the dark side. Yeah. Favorite project I ever worked on. Gosh, these are hard questions. Favorite project I worked on, but not necessarily the favorite project. How it ended up. And I think you probably all know what I mean. You probably all had a taste of that. There was a series or an hour special called Mountain Lion and Me. And it was about this mountain lion that lives basically right here in my backyard. She did for about 8 years, but I followed and tracked her for about 6. First couple, I just was walking and following her tracks, never saw her. And then as I started to learn her patterns and stuff, started implementing some technology, camera traps, thermal imaging. And then about the time VisionHawk lifted off and I got my vision, my shot over in my truck, I made this film. I could. And I had been told over and over again that no one was going to commission a show about wild mountain lions in North America. Because every time they did, they just got a show of people looking for mountain lions and not finding them. So the challenge of that was a big part of why I wanted to do it. But I wanted to tell this elusive cat story. It was an animal that, growing up in Montana at the time, I probably only seen like 6 of them in the wild. And now I had this, through tracking and spending a lot of time, started getting this female dialed in, and where I was seeing her almost every day with my, with my naked eyes, seeing her out there. And then there was a stint there when I was filming. I filmed her every day for about a month. And that just is incredible. So here I have this opportunity to tell a visual story of one of the most elusive animals on the planet. One who was raising kittens on the fringe of humanity in my backyard. And it was a very cool story. And I spent, invested 8 years in that cat, spent about 1.5 years properly filming her. And what unfolded was really cool. So that was by far probably my favorite project because it was so personal to me. Just that, I'd deeply fall in love with that individual cat, that species. It was always, mountain lions have always been kind of my favorite. Don't tell Brutus and the other bears that, but they just become they're so challenging. They're so challenging. And I love the fact of when people say it can't be done. If it lives and breathes on the earth and leaves a track, which everything does, I can find it. I believe that. And why not?
Well,
try?
if you put your hat in the ring for a Wolverine show, that's another one of those elusive creatures that
it is. I got some good spots though. But I want to, I will do a good Wolverine show at some point because I know I can. And I think they're an animal that's, like many, highly misunderstood. There's just nothing out there on them. The science changes constantly about them because it's just there is none.
They're painted as such vicious creatures, and they're just, I've seen more in the last year than I ever have. And there is I didn't feel threatened at any one time.
No, they're just curious mustelids that just, they have the potential to protect themselves if you mess with them. Right. And, but other than that, they're shy and they're playful. They're highly social when they come around each other. They love to spend time with each other playing. That's some of the things that I've seen. All the things that you don't want to believe in a Wolverine, right? You want to think about him as everybody wants to think about this animal that can eat a grizzly bear and fight wolf packs. But in the end, they're mostly just giant clowns, like most of the animals that are just loving life out there. And yeah, that's a story that needs to be told. I think, you know, you'll fall in love with that animal and care about its habitat being destroyed a lot easier than the vicious animal where we all.
I did learn
Sign me up for that one.
I did learn a life lesson about a Wolverine, and that's don't try to sneak up on them when they're eating.
Well, I think that's a good lesson for any.
Yeah, you're a bear guy. I think that lesson would have been learned a long time ago.
Well, I think that, you know, like a lot of the mustelids, man, like protect badgers, for example. I mean, I had worked with some Wolverines in captivity early on in my life when I was about 17, 18. And we, you know, handling them and being around them, you start to learn things. And they're like a lot like bears and badgers are a little nearsighted. So often as you approach them, they don't even know you're there till that last second. And that's just their thing. Make a lot of noise, dig in, make a lot of flash, you know, back the hell off, you know, and that's what they do. But a lot of it is bluff. It really is. They'll just come right to you. And if you don't engage, they'll just hold their ground and back up. It's just hard to not, you know, to stand your ground. Yeah, I think that. Yeah, I would never sneak up on a Wolverine.
Well, we'd spend all day with it, and I don't know. It was hunting foxes. This is at McNeil, and it got one of the fox kits from the den behind my cabin, and it had been running like through our legs earlier, and it would just look through you, like we were of no consequence to it. It had its nose down, it's just going. And then it got one of the fox kits and was in this elderberry bush. And Tony and I were trying to like look in there, and it just popped its head out and goes, "Rrr." And we're like, oh, okay, back up.
That's a cool animal. I think the one thing I love about them is just that they, like grizzly bears, but particularly Wolverines, is that they don't get in their own way. I see a lot of that same in my little girl. Like, she hasn't learned to get in her own way yet. That's why she climbed that 11,000-foot peak. She wasn't thinking about what she's going to eat next or what she's got to do tomorrow. And she wasn't thinking about it, even how her legs were aching. You know, she was going to get to the top of the mountain and one step at a time. And a Wolverine, man, they just don't get in their own way. They don't come up with excuses. They just go where they want to go and do whatever the hell they want to do. I love it. So
you have a podcast. Tell us a little bit about your podcast and why you came up with it and what you're talking about on that thing.
Yeah, Sidetracked with Casey Anderson, which is going to have a different name, but if you follow Sidetracked with Casey Anderson or go to VisionHawkFilms.com, you'll see whatever we changed the name to. But Sidetracked was, I mean, just that, man. I mean, as a tracker, we'd like, you know, I wanted to use it was a double meaning there, right?
Oh, I get it now. Oh.
But if you know me, and as you guys have in the last hour or so we've spent together, I'm easily sidetracked. You know, we could easily, you know, so I think that I wanted to do a podcast where we would, you know, talk just like we are right now, I think, and, you know, dive into some of these issues, but let the conversation go where it may. And I think when you're around interesting people talking about interesting stuff, it's the discovery in the conversation of other things off your agenda that often are the best bits of banter. And so I think that's kind of what that was born of. So I mean, I tackle everything on it, from getting lost to living amongst predators. I mean, there's all kinds of things. Cheetah conservation in Zambia. I mean, I talked to all kinds of different people. Yeah, and it's funny. I mean, one of my favorite ones, or not probably the favorite of most guests, or maybe it is, but one of my good buddies, a guy named Andy Brandy Casagrande. I don't know if you guys know who he is, but he's a shark guy.
Oh man, I listened to a podcast that he did on the Master of Wildlife Filmmakers.
Oh yeah, so very similar.
Yeah.
If you listen to that one, the guy just put a quarter in the guy. He talks, and you know, we've covered everything from sharks, grizzly bears, cocaine, hookers. I mean, it went everywhere. I mean, it was everywhere, and it was he's a fun guy, but it just like, but there were some real gems moments in there of just real thoughtful, philosophical things about him and his family and shark conservation too. But that's what I love. I love how it just letting it breathe, letting it go, letting the people be people and talk about whatever they want to talk about, and everybody can get sidetracked together and go down every rabbit hole they want to.
Oh, we do that constantly. We wild, exposed, and definitely distracted. So Christmas is coming, and for the photographer in your life, make sure you visit Precision Camera. Make sure you use the promo code 50 off of 500 to get $50 off a purchase of $500 or more. But make sure you get all your camera gear from Precision Camera.
And we were just down there doing a presentation, and we were in the shop, and they got tons of stuff. I mean, the used gear that they have in those cabinets was incredible. So if you don't have to buy new stuff.
Correct. Used gear and the outgoing models. For instance, the R6 is being replaced by the R6 Mark II. They've got plenty of R6s that they are making good deals on. Also, while you're doing your Christmas shopping, filling your Christmas lists, make sure you hit the Wild and Exposed store as well and get the It Depends t-shirt for everybody on your Christmas list.
Because I'm sure everybody answers every question with "it depends," right? When you get a camera question,
there's no question that can't be answered with "it depends." Casey, one of the things I wanted to ask you about, or kind of bring up for our audience, is I've seen on your social media, particularly your Instagram feed, there's been a couple bear attacks lately that have been publicized, gone viral, and there's good and bad to that, right? And one of the things that you've done is kind of broken down some of those behavioral cues that people can look at, as well as, hey, we don't want to belittle necessarily the person that's in this situation. We weren't there. We don't know exactly what happened, but here's some things that you can think about to kind of train your mind for those that are in those situations to be, think about. You train your mind and you tend to react in that way. So could you kind of touch on those breakdowns? There was one in Wyoming, and those 4 young men didn't have any, they did have some sort of a clue that the bear was there. They saw a lot of scat, they saw a lot of sign, but they didn't know exactly where the bear was. There's another that was a black bear that was on a cliff face, and it was kind of, it continued to go up the cliff face at what appeared to be at the hiker, but there was more to that video that wasn't necessarily shown on the part that went viral. So could you kind of touch on those and your breakdown of those instances and what people might think about in the future?
Yeah, no, I appreciate you bringing that up. I think the more and more there's people out in the woods these days, everybody's got a cell phone, everybody can video these moments, and then those moments often become viral videos. And then when they're on that platform and they're gone viral, they're open for interpretation. And often there's no, I hate to use the word expertise, but there's no like real knowledge behind those posts. There's not a learn. I find like there's a real good learning moments there, good teaching moments there. And so I've kind of, I've taken it on upon myself. I see these things for what they are, and I want to kind of interpret what's actually happening there. And then more so, if people find themselves in those situations, what they could do to maybe come out on the other end of it. And again, you're right. I think a lot of these things that we're seeing, it is no fault to the people that are in them. Usually people have stumbled into these bad situations. They're reacting the way that they're going to react, good or bad. And sometimes people surprise me and do the good thing, and sometimes people do the wrong thing. And I think those are important teaching moments again. One of the a couple mountain lion ones. There was a real popular one where the kid was running down the trail in Utah and ran into a mountain lion and her kittens, and then she came out at him very aggressively for a very long period of time. Real classic behavior of a female protecting her kittens. But all the headlines and all the comments I saw was, this cat was going to kill him and eat him. She was stalking him to kill him and eat him. And it was all wrong, right? And it's this misinformation that kind of gives these animals a bad name. It was a mom protecting her young, and that needed to be spelled out to the masses. And I think that people listen to me a little bit. I think I've got that platform that they'll actually listen and respect no matter what side of the wildlife conservation they sit on. So I think it's important for me to try to do those interpretations.
That mountain lion incident in particular, you were talking about the expertise being missing. That one was completely missing context. When the clip or the portion of the clip that was actually shown, because there was more video when the young cat was crossing the trail and the guy was actually closing distance. Well, in that one in particular, he kind of put himself in that situation where mom's going to have to do something.
He did, and she was coming very defensive, aggressive to him, and he was backing away, and he was doing exactly what she wanted him to, so she just kept her foot to the pedal to the metal, and because I'm going to keep doing this. But it was all bluff, it was all, I'm just going to keep moving this guy back, get him away from my kittens. And yeah, out of context, you see this aggressive cat at you. But with all those mountain lion situations, the bottom line is if mountain lions killing deer, elk, or whatever, those deer and elk never see that thing coming. And so if a cat's going to try to kill you, you're never going to see that thing coming. So in all these cases where you have a cat confronting you, it's usually because they're defending something like they're young, or I've seen cats, you'll see them and they actually squat down and kind of come towards you because they're getting closer to maybe a bush that's closer instead of farther away, and they're just going to go to that to hide. But people think they're getting stalked. That cat is actually going to cover and just watching you, right, and trying to hide. But out of context, you think this cat's stalking you and trying to kill you. And the bottom line is, if the cat wanted to kill you, you're never going to see it coming.
So did that kid do the thing right then as he was backing off? Is that the right approach?
It's a tough one. It worked for him, right? He backed away, he lived to tell the story. When a mountain lion is doing that, honestly, you can immediately end it by being kind of counter aggressive. If you just say, and just scream and throw stuff at it or whatever, cats can't handle that. It would have just ran away. It's hard to tell people to do that because most people are not going to. I mean, at least you can say, just hold your ground. The reason why it went off so long is because he was backing away. I think you also got to be careful. The same with bears. There's a general thing when you're telling people, don't back away. That is a good lesson. Don't back away, because if a cat is thinking about eating you, then you are kind of kicking into that predatory instincts they might have, and they might provoke that. So standing your ground, being loud, throwing stuff. I mean, all animals think throwing's magic, right? We're the only animals that really can do it well. And anytime you start throwing things, they're just like, what is going on here? This is the strangest thing I've ever seen. It just kind of blows their mind. And so I think that helps a lot, throwing stuff, especially with an aggressive cat. Now, again, I got to talk about this bear. The bear is the kids in Wyoming. I haven't given a real good rebuttal to that yet. I want to. And I'll tell you why, because all the headlines, again, I don't want to take away from these kids. They're alive. What they did for each other was amazing, sticking up for each other. But in the end, the headlines were basically celebrating the fact that they fought this bear, and that they're lucky. They are lucky that they didn't die. I would love to do the interview. I mean, I think that maybe they overwhelmed that bear, and that bear decided that it wasn't going to fight anymore that day. But in most cases, we all know a defensive bear, if you fight, you're just asking for a bigger fight. And I hate that the headlines, I mean, every big news station, and Today Show, Good Morning America, all of them have just had these kids on, and there's like, your friend stuck up, you guys fought this grizzly bear off. And I just think it was the most terrible information. It worked for those kids, luckily. I mean, one of them got his face ripped off a bit, and that's because he was screaming, guaranteed. But I think that I would love to sit down and interview those kids. And I think we're working on trying to, because I want to really pull what that story is without taking anything away from them. While they may have done some things right, they mostly did things wrong. And it's hard to say that because they lived, right? But there's a lot there that they did wrong. And I'm not afraid to confront it because it's the truth. And I don't want other people to die and other people to think that if a bear attacks them, that they should go attack, on the counter attack and fight it, because that's not the right thing to do. I know I've interviewed probably 20 grizzly attack survivors, and also probably have another dozen situations where someone was with somebody who was killed, or just investigate a grizzly bear attack scene where people are killed. And I'm here to tell you that 99% of the time when you fight back, you either look funny for the rest of your life or you're dead. That's just the way it goes.
So where do you put this? Is this stuff on your Instagram feed, or where? I think I saw one of those. Is it something? It's not a story, right? It's something that stays there.
Yeah, we usually put up, so I'm going to start doing this. I just think it's just something that's important because there can be so many more of these. And I'm only going to do it if I think I really can look at the behavior and really understand it. And no, I'm not going to pretend like I know if I don't. But if if I can interpret it and these big viral things come out, I'm going to continue to do. I'm just kind of give a voice to what's going on there. Because I think a lot of people want to know. They see these things, and a guy with his handgun out, or a cat coming at him, and he shoots and misses, and everybody, they think that cat's going to kill and eat him. I want to tell them that's not what's happening there. And I want to talk about defense of predators with handguns and how poor of a choice that is. There's lots of good learning stuff there. I'm going to keep posting them on my Instagram, my Facebook. We're going to put them on my YouTube channel. I think that it's an important thing that I got to keep doing.
Well, I think it's important. If you look at law enforcement, military training, you're going to go into some dangerous situations. You put yourself there in your mind first. And so anytime we have the opportunity to see these things, and then you can kind of dissect it or listen to somebody who's been in the field, got a lot of experience with these animals, and listen to it and train your mind to react. The likelihood of you doing everything perfect is very slim because these things are happening in the blink of an eye. But if you don't put your mind there first and prepare yourself for it, you're not going to do anything right, for sure. So it gives you an opportunity to kind of prepare for a worst case scenario and hopefully give you some tools in the tool bag that can get you out of one of those bad situations.
That's well put. That's exactly what we're trying to do. That's really is. It's muscle memory. All that stuff. You just get reminded a little bit. It's amazing how you will sit back into that little something you might have heard on Instagram. It might save your life. Every time we go out in the field with my team, and we recap all that stuff to ourselves, even though we've been there a million times, because I think it's important, because you do, when you're in that situation, when shit hits the fan, it's surprising what people do. They're never what it's never what you think usually. But if you sit there and you remind yourself over and over and over again, it gives you a better chance that you might do the right thing.
People ask me all the time, because they see the pictures of the video that we shoot, and they're like, well, how big was the gun that you had? And I'm like, I don't carry a gun. I couldn't hit the broadside of a barn with a gun. The adrenaline, there's just no way. Bear spray, at least you have a shot at spraying something somewhere.
Yeah, I think there's so many tools we can use. I don't carry any kind of firearm either. I've brought them with just to make other people feel secure, but it's just part of the game, right? I never use it. And you read over and over. I've witnessed and interviewed people that when you introduce firearms, usually someone gets shot, or the animal just becomes more angry and tears your face off even more. Just the way it is.
Well, I guess you could use it for noise, right? I could see that happening just to make some noise, but I'd much rather be prepared in another way.
If there's one bit of advice from all those interviews and stuff that I keep saying over and over, man, when it comes to a bear attack, this is one of the hardest things, I think, for anybody to, I think instinctually you go there, but it's one of the greatest bits of advice I could give you. If you are ever attacked by a bear, do not scream. Do not scream. Don't scream. Everything, just all that facial and neck injuries that happen, all are provoked by that sound. I mean, that's so deeply instilled in them to make the noise stop by crushing your head like a grape. And that is just it. And I mean, as hard as it would be if you're getting attacked by a bear not to scream, again, I hammer that into everybody. Just don't do it. Because that is 100% of all of those interviews and conversations I've had. As soon as people start screaming, the attack turns right to their face and their head and their neck.
This has been kind of a roller coaster. We've had, we started on a high note, then we kind of dug into some dark things, and then we kind of brought it back. Now we're back in the dark again, just as we kind of wrap it up. But I think we have to get it out there. It's, again, it just gives people an opportunity to prepare. And most people that end up in those situations, it's like, don't pet the fluffy cows. You can tell people and tell people and tell people, but they're going to continue to get gored by a buffalo or a bison because they won't heed the warnings. So it happens every year. So the bear recovery in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem has been going on for a long time. And up until just a few years ago, there had never been an attack on a white cow. No Charolais cattle were ever, and they were right in the heart of grizzly country, were ever predated by a grizzly bear. And that just changed recently. That's no longer the case, but I don't know what it was. I mean, they're bigger cattle, but.
Well, so I can give you a little more detail on that story. I think I have some. So in Tom Minor Basin, where there's probably arguably one of the most, the cattle there are actually they're not Charolais, but they're white. They're called like ancient white. I wish I could remember it off the top of my head. They're a very specific breed of cattle that have a very innate, like I would call it, a bison kind of mentality, where they really they'll come up and they'll gather up, and they're pretty counter aggressive to any predator. And that's why the B-Bar Ranch there that has those cattle, that's why they chose that breed, because of this behavior. And it was successful until 1 year, I think a couple of years ago, there was a big male grizzly was in there playing whack-a-mole with them for a while and killed like 4.
Yeah, same thing happened down near Carter Mountain near Cody, Wyoming. I think it was the Hoodoo Ranch. I'm probably wrong about that, but anyway, they had Charolais cattle and same type of behavior. So they just didn't predate on them, but that has changed. All you need is one individual who's fearless, and that's going to change, right?
Well, Casey, I'm really glad. I when we were talking about scheduling you on here, I had him wait until after polar bear season so I could jump on and chat with you, because we hadn't had a chance to catch up in so long. So it's good to hear your voice and hear that you're doing so well. And I can't wait to get back out in the field with you.
I agree, man. I'm glad that you were able to make it, and I'm glad we coordinated that way. I could talk bears with Drew forever. We could probably go on for another 5 hours of just talking bears. But yeah, I think that's the main. Yeah, let's get back in the field together. I think we've got a couple of little leads to do so. Let's continue the conversation, figure out a way to get back in the field, and then on the next time I'm on the podcast, we can talk about all the shenanigans that we got ourselves into, all the cool things we saw.
Absolutely. I'm just going to find out where camp is, and then it's going to be game on.
Yeah, I mean, we're all in the biz together. That's the one thing I'm surprised. We'll probably all end up working together at some point. Hopefully, let's figure out. That's the thing. It's all about that, man. It's all about good relationships, working with people you want to, getting out in the field and having fun, and telling some cool stories that hopefully make a difference.
Thanks a bunch for your time, Casey, and look forward to hearing you on Sidetracked with Casey Anderson, or whatever it is that you choose to name it in the future, and let us know so we can get that out for people as well, and to get more of the insight on some of these viral videos. I think it's valuable for people. I'm
happy to do them, and I appreciate the time today, guys. And it's been really fun chatting with you,
Casey. Before we jump off, and we're ready to do that, but where else can people find you? If you just go ahead and lay out your website and your Instagram handle so people can find you on those platforms.
Yeah, Instagram and Facebook, it's @GrizzlyGuy. Yeah, if you want to look at some websites, VisionHawkFilms.com and CaseyAnderson.tv. Yeah, we keep things, all the updates on all those platforms. Pretty active. Instagram, my Facebook, super active. Really, I got a group of followers that are super interactive. Yeah, Facebook's kind of going down the wayside, it seems like. So I'm trying to convert over and hang out with all the cool kids. Thinking about doing a TikTok. Haven't done it yet, but probably will have one before the end of the year. Yeah, we'll see.
All right. Well, thank you all for listening to another episode of Wild and Exposed.
You've been listening to the Wild and Exposed podcast. If you haven't yet, please give us a rating and a review. And make sure you're subscribed so that you'll get every episode we produce as soon as we drop it. And as always, thanks for tuning in.
We're gonna make it someday. Nothing's gonna get in our way.